This Equipment World video is brought to you by Chevron Delo 600 ADF Ultra Low Ash Diesel Engine Oil. It's time to kick some ash.
Hi everybody, welcome back to Equipment World. You're watching The Dirt. I'm your host Brian, and today we're here to talk about springtime. Now that the temperatures are starting to change, what do we really need to worry about from a lubricants standpoint on our machines? Well, here to talk with us from Chevron today is Gene Jensen, and he's going to give us a quick rundown on some of the things you should consider as the temperatures start to change.
So my first question for you is, as the temperatures start to change, there's a lot of contractors out there that they've got a one-size-fits-all of everything lubricant-wise. What are your kind of thoughts on lubricants that contractors really should be kind of considering switching out between the cold months and the warmer months?
So I'm going to kind of expand on your question. I'm going to go to checking and changing. I'm going to talk about two different things here, talk about some other stuff later. Let's first of all talk about Big Yellow Equipment and the T04 spec. It stands for transmission oil iteration number 4 as far as I understand it. And we typically see a 10 in the hydraulics and a 30 in the tranny and a 50 in the final drives, okay? So as we move from warm to cold or cold to warm, either one, we want to look at those, because if we're moving to hot, we may have to move up in viscosity. If we're moving to cold, we may have to move down in viscosity. So, for example, the 50 on the final drive, there are 60s out there. And, I've also seen 10 weight put in transmission. So we kind of move around. We kind of have to move around. Now, a lot of people don't like to do that.
That's a lot of extra work.
Yeah, it's a lot of extra work. And so what we've come up with is kind of like a multi-viscosity kind of deal. There are products out there that you can put in there that will function in the temperature range. So we have a fluid that can take in the 10 and the 30. So like on a service truck, you can reduce the amount of compartments that you need by using one product for the hydraulics and the transmission. Now, they're more expensive, of course, because they're multi-viscosity. Now, in some cases, that fluid can actually do the final drives, but I get a little bit skittish on final drives because they're under there's a lot of work going on there. And I'll kind of add one more little thing there, Brian, is that the hydraulics in and of themselves, there are different temperature ranges of use. Like maybe a more inexpensive hydraulic oil and I like to use my hands here. Maybe the temperature range of use. In other words, if this is hot and this is cold, it's fine. It's not too thick and it's not too thin. But there are hydraulic oils that have a wider temperature range of use. We call that viscosity index. But basically, we can take more heat and we can take more cold. That's an idea to avoid this changing with the seasons.
So let's flip over to grease for a minute, because coming out of the field, grease was always one of those things that I don't want to fool around with different tubes of grease and all this stuff. Is grease something that you should really consider switching out with the changing season, or is one grease going to do the job year round?
Well, sometimes you have to, right? It's pumpability. Sometimes you're out and you're cold and it just won't pump. And so you got to change it. So to kind of answer a little bit, I want to go back. What is a grease? Well, we only use a grease because we have to.
Sure.
It would be way better to have a fluid that flowed in that bearing or that bushing or whatever, because it cleans it and it cools it. And of course, we don't have that capability all the time, so we've got to have a grease that'll stay in place. What is a grease? It's base oil. Base oil is the most important part, whether it's mineral or synthetic, and what the viscosity of that base oil is. Okay. For example, a wheel bearing uses a lighter vis than a big heavy piece of equipment, and you should know which one you're using in which application. So we have the base oil, then we have the thickener, and the way the thickener works is kind of like grandma, she's making gravy, right? So she takes the leftovers from the roast, the base oil in the bottom of the pan, and she adds flour or cornstarch. Well, that's how we make grease, is we put a thickener in there. And there's a little kind of a sidebar there. You got to be careful, because these thickeners that we use, there's various kinds of them. Lithium and lithium complex are the most common. But they don't work and play well with one another, so they cause it to fall apart. So you've got to be careful there. And then, the other consideration that you might want to look at is the additives. We put extreme pressure in there. Most greases, they're called an EP, which stands for extreme pressure, because when those things slap together, a lot of it gets pushed out of the way, and those extreme pressure additives, they're kind of adhere to the metal and they give lubrication. We have tackiness, and there's the good old pocket tachometer the guy carries around. He goes like this, and he likes it to string out and all that kind of stuff. And then the last thing that I'll kind of to talk about is moly. Some applications you like to have moly, like bucket pins, and some you don't. And so, anyway, the best practice as you're moving from grease is, like in the wintertime, you might have to go to a number 1 grease, which is less thickener. Grandma didn't put as much flour in there. We didn't put as much thickener in there. But in the summertime, you might move to a number 2 grease because it's, it hangs in there better with the heat. And you want to make sure that you stay in the same family, because these thickeners, they don't like each other sometimes. And you want to make sure, of course, that you get the right viscosity. And then the last thing that I'll kind of talk about with grease is color. Color doesn't mean anything. Color is a dye. Moly greases are all gray because the molybdenum makes them gray, but all these reds and blues and all these other colors, it's just a dye. And when you work a grease for a while, it goes dark anyway. So anyway, those are kind of some considerations from one grease to another, and also when you're moving from, a time of year when you can pump it and when you can't really pump it.
Now, as an operator coming out of the field, I have to tell you, the blue grease always works best. It's got to be the color blue that does it.
So, Brian, that is psychosomatic on your part, buddy. I actually, here's a little story. So this guy, we had brown grease, and he hated it. He just thought it was the worst stuff. And we literally had the exact same stuff, and it was red. And it was the greatest stuff ever. So it's psychosomatic.
That's funny. Well, let's flip over now to, we've kind of talked about the yellow iron side. What about on-road trucks? Because we do have a lot of service trucks, low boys, stuff like that. What do contractors need to kind of consider as we move into the warmer months for those vehicles?
But before we get into that, I want to take a second to tell you about the sponsor of this video, Chevron Lubricants. Protecting your diesel engine and its exhaust aftertreatment system has traditionally been seen as an either-or proposition when it comes to choosing the engine oil that's going to protect your system. And that's exactly why Chevron spent more than a decade of R&D work developing a no-compromise formulation. Now, I don't have to tell you why a clogged DPF is bad news, but here's the real kick in the pants. 90% of that ash clogging up your DPF and then upping your fuel and maintenance costs, it comes from your engine oil. You might be thinking, why don't they make an engine oil with less ash in it then? You'll be happy to learn that Chevron agrees with you. They've developed a new ultra-low ash diesel engine oil that is specifically designed to combat DPF ash clogging. Delo 600 ADF with OmniMax technology cuts sulfate ash by 60%, radically reducing the rate of DPF clogging and extending the DPF service life by 2.5 times. Before you had to choose between protecting your engine or your aftertreatment system. Now you don't. Delo 600 ADF with OmniMax technology. It's time to kick some ash.
What about on-road trucks? What do contractors need to kind of consider as we move into the warmer months for those vehicles?
So I'm going to expand on grease first. We were just talking about grease. I'll just keep going there. So the moly that I talked about is great in like bucket pins and slow-moving bearings, like on the big yellow equipment. But in the trucks and wheel bearings and such, it's not. Now, not everybody believes that completely, but my experience is that moly is slightly abrasive. And so if you're going to put the same grease in the big yellow equipment as well as the service truck, it'll work, but the bearing won't last as long. The wheel bearings won't last as long.
Interesting.
Yeah, so moly is good in some places and not another, in my opinion. The other thing is of course, the transmissions are different in these service trucks and the low boys and that sort of thing. And what's happened over the years is we used to have a standard 50 weight that we put in there synthetic in those trannies which is a different tranny completely than of course the yellow equipment. But then Volvo came up with their own deal. Eaton, Daimler, they all came up with their own transmission fluid. So now instead of like having a straight 50 weight, we have 3 different fluids based on who the manufacturer is, and they have different viscosity, because one of the things they wanted is they wanted multi-viscosity. They didn't want just a straight 50, they wanted multi-vis. And then I'll add one more thing on transmissions, which is Allison. Allison, they just upgraded their spec. It's now called TES 668, and there's another fluid for that. So it's gotten complicated, and these multi-viscosity things make it confusing for mechanics and stuff, because they see like 7590 and they think that's a rear end oil. No, I mean you screw things up. Don't do that. There's different additives in transmission and rear ends. And then let's talk about service trucks and stuff. is the manufacturers have also changed. They're like, we've got Dana, Meritor, and Stemco. They kind of all subscribe, but it's a different additive package than the typical gear oils that we've seen, 75, 90, 80, 140. It's still those viscosities, but the additive package has changed. So we had to change that to another fluid. So here we go. We still have the old one, but we've got the new ones. And then Daimler, there are some of those out there on the rear ends, and they have their own fluid as well that's got its own viscosity, and it's very confusing. So little fun story. I was in a construction shop, and they literally took duct tape and they put transmission, wrote transmission on the duct tape, and then they wrote rear end, and they wrote on duct tape on the other tank, right? Because they couldn't keep it straight. They looked the same.
It is interesting. It becomes apparent to me, gone are the days, and this is for a lot of the smaller contractors that do all of their own maintenance, gone are the days where you just throw a specific weight of oil in something because that's the way it's always been. It's becoming more and more apparent you have to read the manufacturer's specs before you put any fluids in these machines.
Absolutely, and that's really apparent when you're talking about engine oil. I get asked all the time, is there a universal engine oil? Does it matter if I'm in the northern climate or the southern climate or whatever? I get asked questions like that. So just kind of taking one step back and saying, well, let's dissect what 1540 means. Well, 1540 means it's really a 15-weight oil, okay? And then the 40 is, we put an additive in there, it's called the viscosity index improver. But what it does is it helps it thin out slower. It doesn't thicken. 15 at startup, it does act like a 15 weight. But at operating temperature, it acts like a 40 because it thins out slower. We put an additive in there that makes it thin out slower. If you look at an OEM and they'll say, okay, in a cold climate, use a 5W40. Okay, in a hotter climate, maybe 1540. You don't need that low end. So what you need to look at is where are you working? Where's your stuff? And if you need the low ends, then you need the low ends. Even the OEMs, they will make a recommendation based on what the average temperature is. So yes, there is a difference whether you're working in a cold climate or a warm climate.
Well, now it's my turn to revisit grease, because I have a question for you. You mentioned moly and you mentioned lithium-based with the thickeners. What are the advantages of moly over lithium? Because I heard you talk about that kind of more for the yellow iron versus lithium for the trucks. Why use one over the other as opposed to just going lithium for everything?
All right, so we'll just differentiate, just break apart your question just for a little second. The lithium, there's lithium and lithium complex. That's actually the thickener.
Okay.
So that's lithium and lithium complex. Now, lithium complex has a higher dropping point, so it's considered a high temp grease. So we're talking about the thickener. Now let's talk about moly a little bit deeper. When you look at it, it looks like black baby powder, and it's put in the grease, and it's a solid.
Kind of like graphite almost?
Yeah, I mean, we don't use graphite anymore. I mean, there you can still get it, but there's not very many people that use it. But it goes in there, and you pump it in there, and let's take a bucket pin on a front end loader. That is a very severe thing because that bucket gets pushed right into the pile of rocks or whatever. There's a shock load on it, and so all the grease just gets slapped right out of the way. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is the moly will hang around and do a little bit of lubrication. So the bucket pin will last a lot longer with the moly than it will without. Hey, I have another one for you here as we're talking about seasonality. Coolants, okay?
Yes.
Let's back up and say, what is a coolant? It's ethylene glycol, which is put in there to stop it from freezing, and water. It's half and half, okay? Well, the water is what moves the heat. Water is the best heat transfer fluid known, right? And so that's the one that does all the work. And so what happens is in a cooling system, they have little leaks here and there. And what volatilizes first? The water. The water gets out of there, and the glycol's heavier, so it hangs around. And so we top it off, and then we top it off, and then we top it off. And eventually we get too much glycol. Glycol by itself is a horrible, it doesn't move heat very well. Water moves heat. So what happens is, as you get too much glycol in there, then your cooling capability's gone down, and you're going, what the heck, I'm overheating, and it's clear full of coolant. You got too much glycol.
Interesting.
What I suggest is use a refractometer. You put a drop on the refractometer, look through there, and it'll give you the percentage of glycol or the freeze point. And almost always, when we're looking at it, especially this time of year, it's heavy on glycol. And so you want to add water. You don't want to add tap water. You want to add reverse osmosis, that deionized or distilled water, because all the tap water's got crud in there that acts like a blanket keeping heat inside that cooling system. So there's another kind of, as you're looking at seasonality, is look at that coolant. It's often, coolants, they don't get much respect. They need to get a little bit more love.
Come on now, Gene. We all know that you have to look at your coolant one time a year, and it's generally the night before it's going to freeze, and you go out there with your little bubble measure, and you make sure that the little bubbles are floating just right, and if they aren't, you go get you a concentrate jug and just dump the whole thing in. You're good to go for the next year.
Yeah, well, Brian, you're not. Okay, let's just put it that way. You're not. And those little bubble guy things, they work and they don't. And people, they keep them around and they get old. And you really need to look into a refractometer and how that thing works, because that really gives you what it is. And again, I'm going to say you almost always are going to be adding water, not that concentrate that you just said.
And that is totally backwards from everyone I have ever worked for, the way that they handle that situation. So I'm glad we talked about this.
That's right. That's right.
So my final question for you is this really something that we're worried about northern states that get these huge temperature fluctuations, or do operators down in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, is that something they need to worry about as well?
Everything goes to viscosity. So the oil needs to stay in a range of usability. If it gets too cold, it won't flow. If it gets too hot, it's too thin, it won't give you the oil film. In both cases, like in hydraulics, you get cavitation, all that kind of stuff. So what you have to do is you have to adjust viscosity to the temperature that you're working in. Unfortunately, these days we've got multi-viscosity fluids, and then we also have fluids that have, like I just said, I use my little deal here where they have wider temperature ranges of use. So you got to take a look at that. But viscosity is always the most important thing, period. And so what you need to do is you need to adjust so that fluid can handle the temperature that you're using, whether that be hot or whether that be cold.
Well, Gene, thank you so much for the time and all the information. This has been great.
You bet, Brian. Had a good time. Enjoyed it. Love to do it again.
Oh, we will. We'll get you back on here.
Well, thank you again for Gene taking the time to come on the show to give us a little insight as to maybe some things to take into consideration that you haven't in the past when it comes to the temperatures changing over. There's some things you can do from a lubricant standpoint that can materially have an impact even on just the small day-to-day things like greasing your machine. So as always, I hope this has been helpful to your business. We'll catch you guys on the next episode of The Dirt.